Welcome, everyone, to Everyday Infertility. This is your host, Savannah Keys. I am super excited about today's episode because I have Ceire Nevins on today, also known as the Fertility Mama. So, myself and Ceire actually connected over Instagram. She posts some awesome reels about feeling shame, about infertility, people's infertility journey, and so much more. And so, I had actually been following Ceire for quite some time and shared some of our stories, and we got connected and just started talking about infertility and the topic of feeling shame and all of the feelings that come with your infertility journey. So I asked her to be on the podcast, and I am super excited for her to share her story with everyone today. Just a short background about Ceire. So, Ceire is a fertility coach from Boston, Massachusetts. She received her coaching certificate through IIN, which is the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, which focuses on holistic health and the mind body connection. She also received a certificate from the Science of Well-Being course through Yale, which focuses on positive psychology and how to live a happier and better life. Her own experience with infertility led her to discover her passion and purpose, which is to serve, support, and empower women through their fertility journeys and to break through the taboo of infertility, which is awesome because those who have been listening to Everyday Infertility know that's how I started this podcast, is to break down the stigma and the barriers and the taboo that comes with infertility. So, Ceire, welcome to the podcast.
Yay, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And I think, honestly, I think what you're doing is amazing. So I'm
Oh,
so
thank you.
yeah.
Yes, I'm super excited. So, for those of you listening, me and Ceire actually talked a couple weeks ago, and I was like, just tell me your story. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. And I'm taking away all of these different things that we can talk about. But really, kind of what we both agreed on is a lot of Ceira's story kind of builds on, the shame that comes with infertility and kind of those feelings that you feel in the beginning and learning to accept and cope. And while you're going through your infertility journey, even coming out on the other side, which Ceire has been, for a couple years now.
hmm
So, Ceire, share with me just a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I was born in Ireland and moved over here when I was 5. And so I was raised Irish Catholic. And so that kind of plays into my shame story a little bit down the line. But I'm one of 4. And so I'm super close with my family. I think just because also moving over from America and all of our extended family was there, we just were like such a tight knit family. And I always wanted to emulate that growing up. And later, I would also learn that was like a really unconscious belief I was holding on to that I was tying to my happiness without even realizing it.
Mhm.
And so I got married young. I met my husband when I was 19, and we got married at 25, but we had been together for like 6 years at that point. And so
Mhm.
um, I went off birth control when I got married, but I wasn't ready to have kids yet. Like I was working to be in the fashion industry. I was working to be a jewelry buyer there at Rue La La, prominent e-commerce website that I loved, and like we wanted to travel and all of that. But I did go off my birth control because I had been on it for so long, and I was just like worried about the hormones. I wanted to get rid of that. And so then when I was 27, my husband was 29, was when we really started to try. And so I really started to track my ovulation and get really into that. And it was so frustrating. I like just couldn't figure out when I ovulated. The kits never worked for me. I always had like a flashy face, and it was just so frustrating. And
Mhm.
finally, after a year of trying, we went to a fertility doctor. And then that was when we were diagnosed with unexplained infertility. And so we then had started to figure out what our next steps were going to be. And
Yeah.
so we started off with Clomid, which I remember even at the time, like making that decision felt so big, which
Yeah.
now, if I look back, I could only be so lucky to have done Clomid. But that I also want to honor where everyone is on their journey because I know that every little step that we take is a big big leap. So,
Oh, yeah.
um, so Clomid, we were scared because our chances of twins were going to increase about 5 to 10%. And at that point, we were like petrified of twins. And then it's just wild how much your perspective changes down the line, as we know. But so we did Clomid for 6 months, and then that didn't work. And then we did 4 IUIs, which I remember that was just such a vulnerable experience. And during this time,
Mhm.
like we weren't telling anybody. So I wasn't telling anyone at work. And I remember going into work after doing an an IUI, sorry, and getting a coffee with one of my coworkers and just like not being able to speak about everything that was going on and just like how much of a perspective it gave me on like the world and not, like how we just don't know what people are going through.
Yep.
And so that the IUIs didn't work for us. And then we were faced with the decision to do IVF, which
Mhm.
I just, of course, I don't think anyone really imagines themselves in that scenario. And, being raised Irish Catholic, I had it in the back of my mind that it was wrong, even though I
Mhm.
didn't share those beliefs. But it was just kind of ingrained in the back of my mind. And I felt like so shameful about it. Like I felt like I was going to let down my parents and embarrass them with their friends. And I just felt so broken, like so confused, like why didn't my body work like everyone else's? And it just
Mhm.
was a really tough time, of course. And my husband and I, during those times, we would go for long walks before work. We'd get up an hour before work. We'd walk our dogs, dog together, Banksy, to try to stay connected. And I remember, like, during that time, I would look for signs, and dandelions to me were so
Mm.
symbolic of hope and resilience. And I would make a wish, every single morning for our babies. And on one of those walks, my husband, when we were discussing doing IVF, he explained it to me like if you were diagnosed with cancer or another horrible disease, you would use any science or medical advances that you
Yeah.
could, right, to help. And it really helped me just kind of reframe my mindset. And so then we were ready to go forward with IVF. So then once I made that decision, I was like, okay, oh my God, we're doing IVF. Like this has to work, and I was so excited and I was like just ready for it. And then we did our egg retrieval. And I remember that was also a really stressful event for us because we had to do emergency ICSI, which is when they inject the
Mm.
sperm into the egg because it wasn't fertilizing on its own.
Mm.
But like I remember the doctors coming over and asking us before, and it was like this, other fire alarm drill that we just weren't prepared for because it was going to be more money. So they had to let us know. And it
Yep.
just like, gosh, it was just so intense in that moment. It just felt like everything was working against us. And so after that, you had to do the weight of if it makes your embryos make it to day 3 or day 5. We did a fresh embryo
Mhm.
transfer. And then I remember thinking this had to work. Like we were pretty
Yeah.
young, we were unexplained. I was like, we're doing IVF, and so I was just
Yeah.
so naive. And when we got that call, I didn't test or anything early before. I was putting all my trust in the doctors. And then when we got that call that it didn't work, I was just devastated. Like I was like, oh my God, we're like, maybe this really isn't going to happen for us. Like, and we kept being told that our chances were high. And we were just devastated. And so then after that, when we had to go, we had 2 more embryos left. And so we decided that we were going to put 2 embryos in. I was like, I'm listening to myself, like nothing else is working. And so that resulted in our beautiful twin girls today.
Mm.
So,
I love
and
that.
yeah, so that was the first part of our story, and then it's pretty multifaceted and a decade long of family building. But right after my twins were born, we had a surprise pregnancy, which I never would have imagined us being there. Of course, like having gone through infertility, and I remember my doctor at the time, like going in for the um, uh, post post delivery appointment, she was saying you need to be on birth control. And I was like, does this woman know what we've been through? Like, there's no way, right? And we were just both like, there's no way we need to worry about that.
Yeah.
And then I was actually, this is a good story. I was going in for hernia surgery that morning.
Yeah.
I had developed an umbilical hernia from my twin girls. So that morning, I was going in to fix it, and I had a routine doctor's appointment the day before where they had taken a pregnancy test because they knew I was going in for the surgery.
Mhm.
And so my mom's on her way to help watch the twins while my husband takes me in for surgery. And I get a call from my doctor that we were 4 months pregnant with my son. So we were like elated and shocked and just like so proud of our bodies, but just so like taken aback. And so my son, they almost make the Irish triplet mark. He is a year and 1 week apart from my twins, which is just
Wow.
wild. Yeah, it's so wild.
That
But
is
during this, yeah, like during this time, like nobody knew I had done IVF. So even actually when got pregnant with my son, I was like, oh, this is going to help me conceal my fertility struggles even more, which is like so sad to think about
Mhm.
how like just insecure and unconfident I was and how much shame I was like unconsciously holding on to.
Yeah.
Um, so it was yeah, it was just it was wild. But during that time also, like I remember not telling anyone at work, and so I remember the stress of like coming up with excuses for
Mhm.
the doctor's appointments. And I remember like being so proud of myself when I thought of a financial advisor appointment because it was different from the dentist and the doctor, and I was just like so desperate to like for people not to know and to just and just such an added stress that layer
Mhm.
added to everything, and I like it's why I'm so passionate now about just really like empowering women and owning their stories and hopefully and ending this stigma that we carry with us with infertility. It's so tough. It really
Absolutely.
is.
You mentioned how you grew up really played into the shame and feeling that you had to, come up with excuses for your work and, hiding it from people. When you were faced with infertility, how did you handle that news with your family and friends? Was it something that you shared with them, or how long did you keep that to yourself?
Yeah. Well, so I did tell, like, I had my two sisters who are my best friends, and I
Mhm.
have another very close best friend that I told, and my parents as well.
Mhm.
But other than that, we didn't tell like anybody else. We just wanted to
Yeah.
keep it private, which now I think there's like a difference, like, with keeping it private with like a small close knit circle, because like then once you open it up, like it's more people to answer to. It feels like more pressure. But I
Yep.
think the difference with me was after the fact, I still lied about doing it. And I think that, I wasn't living with integrity. I wasn't living in my
Mhm.
truth. And it just was like this dark shadow that was like following me around.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier feeling as if, you let your parents down or you didn't want to embarrass them with, their friends. Does that stem from your upbringing and the religion that you grew up in, or where does that come from?
I think it was just from, well, in the Catholic religion, like doing IVF is wrong, which is just so
Mm.
sad, right? And I think that I think just in the background that was like ingrained in my head. Like I had never really
Yeah.
thought about it until it came up, of course, but
Mhm.
um and so my parents were supportive. They definitely were, but I think I just had such shame tied to it, and I felt guilty, and like
Mhm.
I felt like I felt like it would be easier if we didn't tell anyone, so that like they didn't have to feel shameful and tell their friends,
Yeah.
and so it just kind of piled on.
Yeah. When
Yeah.
you shared this information, obviously your sisters and your family, all grew up with similar beliefs. Was there anyone, for me, I feel like there are a lot of times I create these scenarios in my head before I share, a certain, thing.
Yeah.
And, you're either met with, oh, I expected that response, or, oh, I was totally blown away by how this person handled this thing.
Hmm.
Did you feel once you shared that with your sisters and your parents, did you get the response that you expected, or was it totally different?
Yeah, no, I mean, they were very supportive. And my sister actually, she experienced secondary infertility. So
Mm.
she had got pregnant the first time easily, and then it
Yeah.
took her a few more years longer than she was hoping to get pregnant with her second. And my other sister had experienced two miscarriages. So like
Mhm.
it was around us, like no one
Yeah.
needed to use, they didn't need to use any art or any assisted help to get pregnant, but they were very supportive. And like you said, it was more, I think, in my head.
Yep.
But I do think it's a bit different for my parents just with their upbringing. They were
Yep.
very supportive, but um, yeah, I think that it was tough, and I held on to that for 2 years, and then it wasn't until I met a neighbor down the street when my twins were two. And my son was one, and she was from Ireland as well. And
Mhm.
she had done IVF and the twins were the exact same age as mine,
Wow.
and we just clicked, like we became like BFFs like right away. And like she's just like, now I talk about her like she's my twin flame, which is like a soulmate and someone that highlights your insecurities. They mirror you but show you your insecurities and fears and help you overcome them. And
Mhm.
she just spoke so openly about doing IVF, was so confident about it.
Yeah.
And I like through her connection with her, I just gained the strength, and I started sharing my story with her, and we were
Yeah.
able to talk about the trauma and Googling celebrities and all the things that came along with that. And I just had kept inside for so long. I didn't know anybody else that had done IVF, like no
Mm.
one. And so it felt so good to have that connection. And like
Yeah.
once I started sharing it, now I can't stop. And it just became so freeing and healing and so
Yeah.
necessary. And, you know, it was also something like as I stepped into motherhood, I wanted to be that kind of person that Jess was, my neighbor. I wanted to like stand behind my decisions with conviction and own them. And I
Mhm.
never wanted my girls to think that I was ashamed of how they were
Yeah.
conceived, which I wasn't at all. It was the best decision I ever made. Um, and so, yeah, once I opened up about it, now I can't stop. And it's just a big part of me, a huge part of me now for sure.
So when you meet your neighbor and she's, so open about like, "Hey, Kira, I did IVF and that's how I created my twins." Was there this feeling of guilt of like, do I
Yeah.
continue the lie and be
Yes.
like, "Oh, wow,
Yes.
that's so great," or do I like, and I can imagine, because when I first told people like, "Hey, we're going through infertility," or, would tell someone that didn't know that I had some sort of relationship with, it was this like, how are they going to react? And it's a little bit of like a nerve-wracking thing to say like, "We're going through IVF." What did you
Yes.
feel when she's like, "Yeah, we used IVF to create our
I mean,
twin?"
at this point, I was so like jaded and like used to lying, which is
Yeah.
like so sad when I think about it now. Like I even convinced myself I wasn't lying, which is even crazier. So like we have twins that run in our family. Like my mom
Yeah.
has a set of twins. So I would convince myself like I wasn't lying and that we had twins in our family when people would ask, when like of
Yeah.
course 1,000% like I was. Like because people, the odd thing too is like people will literally come out and say with your twins like, oh, did you do IVF? And just like you catches you off guard, especially if you were holding on to shame like I was.
Yeah.
And so at this point it had been 2 years of that, believe it or not.
Mhm.
And so when she even said she did IVF, like to me it's ridiculous now when I think about it, but I even like still lied in the moment. Like I was like, oh, I didn't, whatever. And it took me, I think maybe like a few weeks or a month after like our friendship grew. And then I remember
Yeah.
telling her, and she was like, oh my, and like you said, it's like these stories we build up in our heads. Like I told all my friends, like, and everyone was just like, oh my God, I wish you told us so we could have been there for you. It was
Yeah.
way more, of course, like a supportive thing, right? But
Yes. Yeah.
like, I don't know why. I must have just been so insecure and unconfident.
Mhm.
And it was just, it's it makes me sad thinking about it now because
Yeah.
and that's why I want to share it, because I don't want, if someone else is listening, like I hope that they gain the strength even just from listening to this podcast, that like there is nothing to be ashamed about. Like you are not broken, you did nothing to cause this. And I think another big factor is that it is a disease. Like the World Health Organization categorizes it as a disease,
Yeah.
but like we don't think of it that way, I think, because like no one talks about it. It isn't covered by insurance everywhere. And so it kind of just like adds to that like build up and layers of feeling ashamed and embarrassed that
Yeah.
you're going through this.
So you're going through the first couple years of your infertility journey and you're keeping this. What is your husband doing? Is he
So
also, and what is his
yes,
feelings?
I know, right? I think he wanted to be private about it too, but he didn't like care. He wouldn't have cared if we had told people either.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that because even when I decided to be open about it, I never even checked with him, like, which is kind of like not fair when I think about it, but I think it was because I knew that he never felt like ashamed about it. He wanted to
Yeah.
be private about it because of, how difficult it was, which I totally
Mhm.
get.
Mhm.
But he was always the one like telling me, like convincing me there was nothing wrong with it and to be comfortable
Mhm.
and like this is the next steps that we need to take to start our
Yeah.
family. And so yeah, he was totally fine with being open about it.
I speak with so many women, and the longer that I've had this podcast and have been open on social media and within our friend group, I've actually had men reach out as well. And I feel like I have definitely had the conversations with the individuals who have been in a very similar situation as you, as they are lying in the fact that they want to keep their situation very private. And that is okay. I'm not here. I am not the judge or juror to say, like, you should tell people you should not lie. Like, that's not my place.
Yeah.
But I feel like I talk to more people who don't lie. They just completely avoid the topic
Mm.
and they are just keeping it private and avoid the topic of starting a family or having kids or anything at all costs. And whether you classify one or the other as like, hey, I'm purposefully lying and hiding this, or I'm just avoiding the topic altogether, you know it is what it is. I always tell people, this is your journey, handle it how you want. But I know how freeing it is to share that news. And
Hmm.
you think, like I mentioned earlier, you have this scenario built in your mind of how people are going to react. And that was the hardest thing for me is I knew everyone would be supportive, but would they be supportive in the fact that they are just like, "Oh yeah, we support you," and never bring it up or avoid the
Hmm.
topic with me or are too pushy and pry into my business. I did not know what that was. And you're going to deal with things here and there, but what I gained from being open about this is like an unwavering amount of support. Our
Hmm.
friends and family are always, and I commend them because even yesterday my husband was in the shower and he was like, "Have you," and I can't remember what the question was, but like, "Do you have a Pinterest page of like what you want the future nursery to look like?" And I was like, "That's such a great question." And I
Yeah.
was like, "No, I don't because I need to protect my feelings." And he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what questions to ask or not ask that aren't going to, like bring up pain for you." And I was like,
Mm.
"Well, one, you're my husband. I know any question you ask is coming from a good place."
Yes.
And then that was a great chance for us to talk about like, yeah, in the beginning, I used to create like Baby Keys Nursery, and all of these things. And then just every time we didn't get pregnant or a transfer failed or, we would be put on pause, I would look back at that and be like, wow, that's sad. Or two, like, that is just not my style anymore. And so it was
Mhm.
a great conversation to have with him. But the main takeaway is while I have all of this support from friends and family, they openly admit, like, I don't know what to ask you. I don't know
Yes.
what to say or not to say. And I just always tell them if you're coming from a good place and you mean no judgment, no harm, no, anything, you're always welcome to ask. And then on the flip side of sharing, I've made such great relationships with
Mhm.
so many other women and men going through this journey that I connect and bond with them in ways that I can't with my friends and family. I've
Exactly.
met a handful of girls on Instagram that actually live like in Oklahoma City and surrounding areas. And I like call them my Instagram besties. I'm like, we
Oh,
keep each
that's
other updated on like
awesome.
our transfers and where we're at and what we're doing. And it's like I can talk to them and share these feelings without having to think like, well, what is my friend going to think if I say this? Yes, they're going
Mhm.
to support me, but they don't understand. So
Yes.
all of that to say, whether someone decides to share or not share, you're going to receive negativity some way or another. You're always going to have someone ask the same question. But what I tell people all the time is, when I wasn't telling people or as open about our infertility journey, I
Mm-hmm.
actually got more hurtful questions and people didn't know because
Yeah.
why would they?
Yeah.
I would get asked all the time, when are you guys going to have kids? And I would
Mm-hmm.
have to like skirt around the question or just be like, oh, when it happens, it happens. And deep down, I'm like, oh, that question hurts so bad because they
Yes.
don't know we've been trying for 18 months and we're now scheduling, appointments with fertility clinics. Once
Yes.
I, then was open with it, I still got questions that I was like, oh, that hurts. Or like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't love how they asked that. But at least was like, I didn't get the questions that I was getting before. And I was able to like educate or say like, "Oh, hey, like here's what's going on." So, all of that to say it's up to you and how you decide to share that and what you want to be open about. I love that you said when you do share, you have this added pressure. And I think anyone going through IUIs or IVF or any type of infertility treatment, they get that.
Yeah.
We have lied, I guess, maybe not told the exact truth with all of our transfers. And we've told people, oh, our transfer will be in a couple weeks, when in reality, we already had it because
Yeah.
we didn't want the added pressure of they know we did that. Every time they talk to us, are they going to ask? Are they going to wonder? There's like this unspoken thing in the room. And so there is a difference to your point of being completely open or maybe choosing a select people to share that with.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think, like you said, it's just so individual for everybody. But
Mhm.
I think the biggest message, hopefully, that we're relaying today is there's nothing to be ashamed of,
Oh, yeah.
and
Mhm.
just to pick your circle and to find the support that you can. And I think
Yeah.
that that's like the biggest lesson is just having, somebody that you can talk to. And if you can't talk to any friends or
Mhm.
family, a coach or a therapist, or
Mhm.
there's so many great, like you said, like when I was going through it now, it was about 8 years ago with the twins, and there wasn't a big Instagram community, but now there's
Mhm.
like so many like wonderful like organizations, like the
Yep.
Rescripted Fertility has like a free virtual online support group, and
Mhm.
resolve.org. And so, and even just following other accounts to feel less
Yep.
alone is just such an awesome outlet now that wasn't there when I was going through it.
Oh, absolutely. I think that is one thing that in this day and age, a lot of people will turn to social media. I know for us, when
Yeah.
we got word you're going through IVF, I went to Google and, of course, did not find anything helpful. And my
Yeah. Oh
husband's like,
gosh.
stay off Google. And I'm like,
Yes.
well, if I'm going to stay off Google and no one in my close circle has done this, what am I supposed to do? And I turned to TikTok. There's amazing accounts out there that openly share, what their feelings are going through this process. Even like, hey, here's videos of me doing my daily shots. I learned so much from
Yes.
those people.
Yes.
People
Definitely.
on, Instagram like yourself posting reels and making you feel, oh wow, I'm not alone in this. And so I
Yes.
think in today's day and age, if you are in that, you know, that portion of your infertility journey where you don't want to share publicly, lean into those, lean into
Yes.
podcasts, lean into TikTok, lean into Instagram. I even found so many resources on Pinterest. And
Mm.
so it's like seeing other real human beings talk about
Exactly.
this and
Yeah.
say, I'm going through it too.
Yeah.
Here's how I feel. Here's what I've done. I
Yeah.
think that is just what everyone needs. And it's what I needed in the first, 3 or 4 months of my journey to even be like, Savannah, you can do this. You
Yeah.
can actually get through this process.
Definitely. Like we gain so much strength through sharing
Yeah.
our stories and other people. And it's just, it really is. It's so important.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was talking with my husband the other night and he was asking me, he was like, what's your next podcast about? And so I was telling him I'm meeting with Kira and we're going to talk about the topic of shame and infertility. And I was like, and it's interesting because how she grew up in the Catholic religion. She had mentioned IVF isn't something that's like, maybe as accepted or something that they believe. And he was like, I've never thought about that. And so then I told him, I was like, interesting enough, there are religions out there. There are people with just like morals and beliefs. There are even like activist groups who do not believe that IVF is okay, or, it doesn't fit into their religion or how they think that a human life should be created.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling him, there are people, I saw on Facebook that someone in Oklahoma, was creating, essentially kind of like an activist group on wasting embryos. And then you have people who are like just petitioning IVF as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, and I'll let you know because I don't want to speak out of line, but I don't think that it's something that a lot of people have to deal with. For me, I'm a Christian, and I don't see it as going against God or playing God. But you have those thoughts and doubts, and you read things online. I've been lucky not to have anyone outwardly attack me or reach out and say things like that. But have you experienced that at all?
I have not personally, and I think
Um,
like we were talking about earlier, it was really just everything in my head. But
mhm.
I mean, yeah, it's super like discouraging, like the overturn of Roe versus Wade and like the
Yeah.
way that people do think out there. Unfortunately, there
Mhm.
are groups like that. And so,
Yeah.
luckily, like we're not affected directly. But there are, I'm sure, people that are listening maybe that have experienced that or in other parts of the country, which is,
Yeah.
just so sad. It really
Mhm.
is. But I think really you have to just stay true to yourself, is what I've
Yes.
learned, and like your
Mhm.
values, right? And like, how you want to live your life with integrity and make decisions for you that are the best for you in this journey. And that's all you can really do.
I love that. I think that's
Yeah.
great. So, you went through unexplained infertility. You did
Yeah.
Clomid, you did IUI, you did IVF, which gave you your twins. And
Yes.
then, a couple months later, awesome, you received news that you had a third, and that was kind of a surprise pregnancy. What was there any different feelings after, you had went through IVF to create or, conceive your twins and then having a surprise pregnancy? Was there any different acceptance or feelings just with yourself?
I think, I mean, to be completely honest, I think we were both really proud of our bodies in that
Yeah.
moment, just from having struggled for so long, for so many
Mhm.
years. We were like, oh my gosh, we
Yeah.
did it. So there was that bit of just surprise element, and
Yeah.
a bit of proudness, I think. But of course, it's all a miracle. I mean, we were just so blessed to be, and especially with twins, to get pregnant.
Mhm.
And so it's the outcome is just a miracle in whatever way you get there, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and then for us too, like I was saying earlier, I had always wanted to have four children. And so after when my twins turned 3 and my son 2, then I was really trying to beg Dave if we could have a fourth. And this was honestly, like, and I say this very sensitively because I know how hard it is to hear if you're struggling and you don't even have one child yet, just being willing to do anything for one child. But this was one of the hardest journeys for me, because I think it was very, my husband and I were fighting all the time, and like we were, very united for the first pregnancy with the twins, and of course with Ollie, my son. And then we were fighting all the time, and I was like trying to convince him that we could do this. And then finally he agreed, but he was very reluctant and said, only naturally, we wouldn't do any art. And so this time I became really obsessive over anything I could do to increase my chances. I was
Mhm.
reading It Starts with an Egg and learning about
Mhm.
endocrine disruptors, which are hormones like or chemicals
Mhm.
that disrupt your hormones, which I had no idea about. So then once I learned about that, I was like literally staring at my plastic water bottle, blaming it for the reason I wasn't pregnant, and it was driving me nutty. I mean, I think totally knowledge is power, but I think sometimes too, it's like everything was just becoming paralyzing, all of the do's and don'ts and what to do. It was like
Mhm.
I became vegan. I was detoxing from endocrine disruptors. I was like, I was reading It Takes Control with for Your Fertility, or Take Charge of Your Fertility, which was great, and that taught me all about like the fertility awareness method, the 3 fertility signs.
Mhm.
Um, but I was like I said, I felt very restrictive, and then I was like resentful of my husband because he wasn't doing anything, and then I became like orthorexic, which is when you're really obsessive about the quality of the food that you're eating. So I would literally bring lunches over to my mom's house or my sister's house. I wouldn't go out to eat. I was just really like starting to live on autopilot, and I was really like losing all the joy in front of me.
Mhm.
I could not, I was just so silent on like, I'll only be happy when I have 4 kids, which is wild. And
Mhm.
I finally hit my like low point, my breaking point, when I had just got a new car and I was pulling into CVS. I had just got my period and I hit a parked car and I just started crying. And I was like, I need to do something. Like, I need to make a change. Like, I wasn't coming from a place of empowerment. I was fighting with
Yeah.
my husband all the time. And so I was like, I need to call a fertility coach. This was just a few years ago. And then it was through that call, just that one call, like hearing myself talk. And at the end of the call, I asked if I could pay through Venmo so my husband wouldn't know. And then I just was like, I can't do this anymore. And
Yeah.
the fertility coach became a bit of a mentor, and she had gone to the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. And so I really, at that time, like I was really getting into like self betterment and self help books, and I was discovering the coaching career. And
Yeah.
then my husband also had gotten a new job right around that time. So I was ready to make that paradigm shift to leave my job and go to school and try to do fertility coaching. But I knew I had so much healing on myself first. And
Mhm.
so that was just such a year of like self growth and healing. And I was able to really identify this like belief system that I was holding on to unconsciously that
Yeah.
I had no idea. Like from,
Mhm.
a dreaming teenager wanting to emulate my family to a new identity of a mom of 3 young kids, a working full-time mom. And I was
Yeah.
just overwhelmed if I was actually listening to myself, like it wasn't the right thing for us. My husband didn't want
Yep.
it. Our house was beautifully chaotic at home. And so through the schooling, I learned, that you can't just be healthy with what you eat. It's really about your primary foods, which is everything you put in your body, and your secondary foods, which is your relationship, your career, your finances, and your movement, and all of that play a factor, and your spirituality into like having a balanced, healthy life. And
Yep.
so I learned like through journaling and meditation and breath work and gratitude, just how to find resolve with no fourth, and really
Yeah.
just, and that was really what birthed, like, instead of birthing a fourth child, I feel like birthed my passion now and purpose to help other women on their
Yeah.
journey.
I love that you openly admit, like there was a unhealthy obsession with what I was going through, and I have been there. I read the It Starts with an Egg, and I'm, that day, without even like really thinking like, okay, let's take baby steps, or like let's talk to my husband. I was like getting online and buying all glass, Tupperware. And I am like, I am never going to drink out of a water bottle. And I remember getting like this water filter and all of these things. And of course, I'm going through an IVF, cycle at that time when this happened.
Yes.
And I remember it was obsessive. It was like, I need to take all of these vitamins and supplements. And then I was researching, like, is there more supplements I was taking? When in reality, my IVF doctor and my naturopath doctor were like, here's what we're saying you need to take. And I'm like, but I
Yes.
can do more. I can do more because this one research paper out here says that there's like this 13% chance of if you add this. And that really started with, you know, also I looked into like what is causing this because I have a diagnosis. My tubes are blocked. You know, we've had people say like outside of that, you look healthy, your husband looks healthy. So I think that obsession of, you know, measuring out beet juice and pomegranate juice and you know, doing all the things and then when our treatments wouldn't work, I was like, well, why? Instead of actually listening to my doctors and understanding, you know, our treatment, which was our IVF, was not 100%. There is sometimes it just doesn't work. And
Mm-hmm.
I was looking for why didn't it work? Was it me? Was it, you know, the toxins in my life? Did I not take the right, you know, supplements? Is it because I cheated and ate gluten at one point? And that's unhealthy. It is almost more harmful to you than just living life. Be
Exactly.
healthy, be aware, but
Yeah.
there is an obsessive point that is almost like you said paralyzing and detrimental to your own self, to your own journey.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like it can just get so overwhelming. And so just progress over perfection is so important
Yeah.
to remember. And like you said,
Mhm.
just don't stop living your life because you could do all, I mean, you can't be perfect, but you could try to be as perfect as you could, right? And
Yep.
it's still not going to work, like you said. So it's like it's finding a healthy balance,
Mhm.
and just doing the best that you can.
Yep.
Yeah.
I am, you know, living proof that I have done multiple rounds. We've done 3 rounds and 2 transfers. My first round, I was obsessive. That's when I was doing all of the supplements and, you know, I was making sure that I was doing the right amount of exercise that they say and drinking the right amount of water and this and that. And I mean, I was about as picture perfect as you can be. And
Hmm.
our transfer still did not work. The second time around, I was not in a good headspace. And I'm not going to say my negative headspace is the reason it didn't work, but I was eating like cookie dough days leading up to my transfer. I was drinking pop, which I don't ever do. I was not living my most healthy self, and it still didn't work. And then the third round, I was taking this like 80-20 approach, like let's just be happy and healthy and live your life. And my transfer still got canceled.
Mm.
And so there are things that you can do to better your chances and to better you and to live a healthier and happier lifestyle. But there are so many things outside of your control. And
Exactly.
for me, it was in between my second and third round, we did the ERA, the Emma, the Alice, the natural killer cell testing after 2 failures. And it was such an eye opener that those results came back and said, you have 0 bacteria in your uterus, in your vaginal canal. And I remember my doctor telling me that. And I'm like, heck yeah. And he's like,
Yeah.
well, no. He's like, you have 0 bad bacteria, which is great, but you have 0 good bacteria, which means that you have a sterile environment. Nothing can live in that. And I remember for me, it was in that moment of like, this is the answer I've been searching for. It's not the whole answer, but looking back on my first transfer, it didn't matter if I took all of those supplements at the same time every day. And I
Right.
was so rigid about everything. If I didn't have the good or bad bacteria, it wouldn't have worked anyways. And the second one, whether I was in a horrible, shitty mindset, that didn't affect why it didn't work. It could have been this. And so as we gear up to go into our next round, I'm looking at it as I'm being healthy. I had a snow cone yesterday. Not good for me, but I'm living that 80-20. I'm happy. I'm confident. I'm positive. I still have the doubts. I still have the what ifs,
Yeah.
but we have done so much testing up until this point that I am confident that what I know about my current situation, I am doing all that I can. I'm controlling my controllables.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think, you know, with you being in the position that you were in where you were so paralyzed and obsessing over everything and kind of having that mental break,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's such a beautiful thing. While in that moment, you're probably like, my life is in shambles and crumbling around me. But it led to you understanding all of these things and accepting, which I do want to talk about, but this like preconceived idea of what our life is going to look like. And then now you're out here helping other people, which I think is so amazing.
Yeah.
So before we hop into, how you are a fertility coach and what that looks like today, I
Mm-hmm.
do want to spend some time talking about what you said because I feel like this is not talked about enough. But you had said, I grew up with a large family. I wanted 4 kids. I had this ingrained in my mind from a young age. And when it didn't happen, you're upset. But at the same time, you weren't checking with yourself, like, is this really what I want right now? Or is
Yes.
this what
Right.
13-year-old Kira wanted?
Exactly right. I feel like it's just so like crazy when we have, well, something that ties into this is like research shows that we have 12 to 60,000 thoughts per day, with 80% of those being negative and 95% of those
Wow.
being repetitive from the day before. So it just kind of goes to show you, if you don't actually sit down and evaluate your thoughts, they're just
Yeah.
going to keep piling, continuing, right? Without even and it really resonates with me when I think about that limiting belief of like, I will only be having to have 4. And it might sound wild to some people, but there are these things that we just hold on to and we don't reevaluate in,
Yeah.
is this aligned with like my values now as a person, my identity now as a person? And
Mhm.
so um yeah, so it's crazy like how much how repetitive our thoughts are, I think, number one,
Yeah.
and especially like also understanding how negative they can be. And that's why it's just so important to like evaluate them and
Mhm.
make sure they're making sense for you now, and I think clients that I work with now, like some limiting beliefs will be like, I need to have like all my kids by 35, like they've had these, or I need to have a girl to be happy, or I need my kids to be spaced
Yes.
this amount apart. Or like, one of them, her mom had her babies, her older, and she thought she was a crazy mom, and then she thought she was going to be a crazy mom. But just like these things that
Yep.
the stories we tell ourselves, and
Mhm.
how important it is to really break those down and
Yeah.
understand, that there isn't truth behind all of them. And like, I
Yeah.
think that's one of the hardest parts about infertility, is like that story that you always imagined, or the picture family that you had, and society and movies, they all make us like
Yeah.
feel like this is all going to happen. And then, you're faced with infertility or things that are different. But I think sometimes too, like what we were talking about earlier, like challenges can be such a gift because they force us to make changes we never would have made. Like,
Oh,
I think
yeah.
about it now, right? Like if I had never had all these failed things, I never would have said I'm putting 2 embryos in, and I never would have had my twins. Or if
Mhm.
I didn't have that breakdown you and I were just talking about, where I, called the fertility coach, hit a parked car, and had this like whole like, life revelation I had to make. Like I never would be a fertility coach now, doing like feeling
Yeah.
such purpose and passion. And like, it's just something I never would have thought a few years ago. I was a jewelry buyer. It's just such a different
Yeah.
change in life. And sometimes I think we have these expectations in life that we think are what we need, or but
Mhm.
truly sometimes we don't really even know,
Yeah.
what is going to be out there for us. And it's just,
Mhm.
it's eye opening, I think.
Me and my best friend, who we have been best friends for, gosh, I think going on 16 years. So, I mean, she knows me sometimes better than I know myself.
Yeah.
And we actually recorded a podcast together. I think it's like episode 4 or something. And we talked about how not only do we create, I have always said, and I've talked about this on so many episodes, I wanted to go to college and get married by this, year and, focus on my career and travel and spend time in my marriage. And then at this age, I want to be pregnant. And this age, I want to have my baby. And then I want to have a second baby. And then I want to have a third baby. And it's going to be 2 boys and a girl. And they're going to be named this and they're going to do that. And it's like, where did that come from? I don't know. To me, I think that's just like the perfect all American life. Maybe it comes from me and my brother almost 9 years apart. We
Mm.
were not close growing up. So I'm like, I want three kids, couple years apart. They're all going to be best friends. Why do I want three? Well, what if two of them don't get along? Then there's another one. And
Yeah.
so it's like, these are stories, like you said, that I tell myself. But I was talking with my best friend Caitlin, and it's like, okay, well, that's my plan. That's not God's plan. That's not the universe's plan. That's not how it's going to happen. But then you also have this societal norm. My
Mhm.
best friend's younger than me. My best friend has been married less time than me. And she's like, when you look at society, she's like, you should have gotten married. You should have focused on your career, traveled, done this, had a baby, and then I should have gotten married. And she's like, and that's just not how it works. And people get so caught up in that.
Yes.
I even just a couple weeks ago was like, my child is going to be younger than my godchild. And I was like, ashamed. I don't want to use the word ashamed, but I was just like, that doesn't fit my narrative. That
Yes.
does not fit my narrative, and I hate that. And in all reality, it's like I would be lucky to have one kid. And whether they're 1 year younger or 7 years younger or 10 years younger, I would be lucky to have that kid. In this change, these challenges that are thrown into your life, they really they they change your narrative whether or not you want that to happen. And I've
Mhm.
had a hard time in that. I always said, I'm going to have a baby by 26. Well, that didn't happen. I'm 28. I'll be 29 in a few months. So now I'm telling myself, you're going to have a baby by 30. Well, what happens when I turn 30 and I don't have a baby?
Mm.
Like, I'm setting these things that may hurt me down the line.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just something that we all do. We all
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
And it's hard to break that rose-colored reality that you're building for yourself.
Yeah.
And some
Absolutely.
people, may classify that as hope. But
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's really hard. I think infertility kind of forces you into that like goal set mentality too, right?
yes.
Like I'll be happy when I have a baby. And I think for me that like really forced me into autopilot and just kind of like
Yeah.
siloed and all consuming. And so
Mhm.
that's definitely something that like I try to work with clients on is being like more
Yeah.
system based mentality, and making sure they have a good support system in place and
Yeah.
that they're setting mental health boundaries and that they're doing self-care and that they're
Yeah.
paying attention to their self-talk, all of those things. So like having a strong system in place, being more present and in the now, and knowing like that you can have happiness now and you don't have to save that for your future self,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But it's so hard. It is.
Yeah, it is. So, you mentioned this thing that instead of, you birthing a fourth child,
Mm.
you've now birthed this passion for helping women in similar situations. How do you ever look back and say, I wish I would have went forward and tried for that fourth? Or is that something that you truly did feel peace in your decision and walking away from that plan?
I mean, I love this question. I think it's something I'm always going to think about, but
Yeah.
we did try for it. Like we tried for
Mhm.
another year and it didn't work. And I did think
Yeah.
like part of me was like thought we cured our infertility because of the surprise birth of my son. And then as soon as we
Mhm.
started back up again, it like I was like right back at square one. It's just so wild too. I feel like what you resist persists, like I feel like I really resisted that first journey and like
Yeah.
lied about it, and then I found myself back where I was trying again, and it just like persisted as this whole other like evolvement in my life into being a fertility coach. But
Yeah.
I think I do think that what's right for us is three children. I do think like a part of me will always have like that feeling, just that
Yeah.
crazy ingrained belief in my body. But I have definitely come to peace with it. And I do think
Good.
I found resolve with it, and I find so much healing in this, like having these conversations
Mhm.
with you and other people, and raising awareness, and just the joy I get from working with my clients is like seriously like more fulfilling than I ever could have imagined, and
Yeah.
celebrating milestones with them has been amazing. So,
I love that. So how are you, a fertility coach? What does that look like? How are you supporting women? What is if I were to reach out to you today, what does
yeah.
that process and journey look like?
Yes. So I think it's really like helping, women find some clarity and confidence on their journeys, like we talked
Mhm.
about with all this overwhelm and isolation. Like, I
Mhm.
think just even having someone that's separate from your well intentioned family and friends, like we talked about earlier,
Mhm.
that can say really hurtful things, and like they
Yeah.
don't mean to, but just having someone there that really understands and knows what you're going through. And just when you make that call and hear yourself, like just how much clarity you can even gain from talking to someone else.
Mhm.
But I've helped people, I've helped women learn like the fertility awareness method that I was talking about earlier. Like I have some women that want to try naturally before progressing to art. So we've
Yeah.
worked on that together. I've worked with people with primary and secondary infertility, and I've worked with women like continuing through their pregnancy through anxiety
Mhm.
and uncertainty.
Yeah.
And then it's really based on what we were talking about earlier, like getting that system in place. And so, like
Mhm.
looking at your support system with your family and friends, or if it's a coach, or a lot of my clients will have therapists as well. And then I
Mhm.
always encourage them to reach out to live virtual support groups like through Fertility Rescripted or Resolve,
Yeah.
because I think there's just so much connection in other people going through it. And then just setting those mental health boundaries. And also, research has shown that the mental health impact of people diagnosed with infertility is similar to someone with cancer or serious
Yeah.
illnesses, which
Mhm.
is, when you hear it, it takes you back a bit. But I think so much of us try to put on a brave face and are suffering in silence. And I think it's just so important to recognize that this
Yeah.
is very valid. Your feelings are all very valid, and to really just put yourself first during this time. And that can mean like setting boundaries. Like if you have a baby shower that you have to go to, that setting some parameters around that. Like, can you leave early? Can you go in on a group gift so you don't have to pick it out? Is it a coworker that
Mhm.
you can come up with a white lie? Like, do you have to be there? And like,
Yeah.
whereas, like, without that support, you can just put yourself in so many triggering situations without like getting that validation, I think, too.
Mhm.
And then just the self care system. So, like, together we'll explore like meditation, journaling, gratitude, mindfulness, whatever it is that works for you to
Yeah.
help deal with that like uncertainty and anxiety. And then the last thing is really your self talk. So, like, just that inner critic of like just always feeling inadequate, like you're not doing enough, and like just so mean to ourselves, and just really learning to like show yourself empathy and kindness, and to, to speak kinder to ourselves as we would our best friends, is so
Mhm.
important. And just identifying those like thought patterns, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so people can book, like we always have a free 30-minute consultation first, just to get to know each other and see if it's a
Yeah.
good fit. And they can do that through my website, which is the Fertility Mama, MAMA. And I also have a While We Wait Self Care Challenge. So that's free. People can like sign up for my newsletter and download
Yeah.
that. And it has workbooks and personality tests and journaling prompts, and then like a 14-day journal at the end that they can hold them accountable for their goals, and, making sure they're doing their self care routines and
Yeah.
all of that.
I
So,
love that. I think that is so awesome. You touched on a few things that you're working through with your clients that I haven't heard. I've followed other fertility coaches. I've seen others kind of share how they work, but you saying like I stay with them throughout the pregnancy, for the anxiety and those feelings, and that is so important because for me, I've never been pregnant. And I see so many different women out on social media that do finally get that pregnancy test. And they always talk about they're holding their breath. They're waiting for the other shoe to drop. It is not just okay, I'm pregnant, everything's rainbow and sunshine right now. And they're like, it took this trauma of getting to this place. And so now I want to hold on to that. And I think that's so important because before that, I've always thought, well, if I can just get pregnant, like my life will be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that. And so I think what you're doing is so important in talking to yourself like your best friend. We're all, we've all talked negative to ourselves. I the other day was putting like supplements in like a Ziploc bag, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I should write like positive things on these. So every day,
Yes.
it at least is one thing that I'm reading that's positive. Now, I feel like I'm in a great headspace right now, but I still have doubts and what ifs, and that's natural. And so I think it's so important, if you are struggling with something like that, to talk to someone like you, and with your background and experience, being able to say like, I have been there. I've
Yes.
been through this. I've felt the feelings. I've felt, I understand what you're going through. I think
Yes.
that's so important. And I love that. And I love the 14 week, or I'm sorry, the 14-day, like while you're in the wait thing. I think that's
Yes.
so awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I think this has been an awesome conversation. I think your story, while, it is obvious that you have been through your own challenges, and I talk about this fertility journey, it is like peaks and valleys and peaks and valleys, and I love that you've gotten to a point in your life that you can share the valleys and you can share the peaks, and you've taken the pain and the excitement and the things that you have come out on the other side with, and now you're helping other people. And I just think that is so brave and so amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. And I think you are so brave and so amazing for sharing your journey, especially as it's still unraveling. And I
Yeah.
think you're just incredible.
Oh, well, I appreciate it, Kira. So, if anyone is looking to schedule time with Kira as a fertility coach, they can find you at thefertilitymama.com, which is MAMA,
Right?
correct?
That's right. Yep.
Awesome. And then you are also on Instagram at the Fertility Mama.
Yes. That's
Okay,
right.
awesome. Well, I highly, highly, highly encourage you all, if you feel like this episode resonated with you, get time with Kira, even if it's just the 30 minutes, to see if this is something that would be positive for you down the line. Sign up for the 14-day while you wait newsletter. I think that is awesome. And those of us who have been in the 2-week wait, you know that you need that positivity during that. So I think that's
Definitely.
awesome. And then lastly, I think just follow her on Instagram. Like I said, I had followed Kira, for a few weeks before I even reached out. And, her reels, you watch them and it's so funny. You're like, I just resonate with this so much, because you take a light-hearted approach to, like, and I'm just gonna say it, like, the really shitty parts of infertility.
Yes.
And it's kind of like you can laugh. You're like, I've been there.
Yes.
So
Totally. Totally.
I think it's great. Keep doing what you're doing,
Thank
Kira, and I
you.
appreciate it. I know the listeners will really, take to your story.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yes,
I really appreciate it.
absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for listening today. As always, you can reach me at everydayinfertility@gmail.com. Reach out. Tell me how this story impacted you, or reach out and let me know other topics that you'd love to hear in the future. You can also reach me at Everyday Infertility on Instagram. And other than that, we'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks, everyone.